what was your reaction to the result of the election? Where were you?
Well, I was in Cupertino in California with my mom, but my dad was in Taiwan and he went to the election. And since my mom and I were in a hotel room, we really didn't have any access to any of the results other than through the internet. But my mom had my uncle call us from Taiwan, and so my mom actually called him at 2 o'clock in the morning because she couldn't go to sleep. But then she heard the result because 2 o'clock, so it would be like, I don't know, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock in Taiwan. And my uncle was just like, oh, bad news, blah, blah. The Green Party is actually having a lead. And my mom's like, oh my gosh, that's disappointing. Well, anyways, I'm gonna go to bed. And then the next morning we woke up and we found out that they actually won by less than 30,000 votes. And then we found out about how there were 330,000 like invalid votes. And so then we started analyzing and thinking about all the things. So that's when the discussions actually began, like with my mom and with her friends and just friends and family. So, but I think most people place a lot of attention on the result itself, like the presidential election, but then they kind of ignored the referendum, which is something that I think last time when we went to that talk, they also didn't talk about. But personally, like I feel the referendum is kind of even more significant than who became the president. And so I just don't know why people don't talk about the referendum itself.
If the referendum had passed, what do you think?
Well,
what do you think that would have actually done?
Okay, so first of all, the referendum didn't even, it wasn't a matter of passing or not passing, but it was invalid because less than 50% of the people went and took the ballot, which itself means a lot because first of all, so I think they just passed something in Taiwan like the referendum in the Constitution, which says that the president can only start a referendum with an emergency decree, or in any other situations, referendums need to be started by the people. They have to start a petition and then start a referendum. But then Chen Shui-bian insisted on doing this referendum this time, and he said that was because Taiwan is in a state of emergency. And so it's kind of already an illegal referendum, but he still did it anyways. And he tied it up with the presidential election so what happened was you had to stand there and you had to say at the polling office whether or not I want the ballot, which means that if you don't want the ballot, people already know who you're going to be voting for. And so it was really hard. He tied it up with the presidential election, so it was really hard for people to not take the ballot. But then if we look at the results, less than 50% of the voting population actually took the ballot, which means that, and he himself had actually said that, Chen Shui-bian said, I would rather you take the referendum ballot and vote for the referendum than actually vote for me. So he's saying I would prefer referendum it's even more important than whether I become president or not, because what makes it so significant is that if the referendum passes this time, next time Chen Shui-bian can also declare a state of emergency, and then he's trying to take step by step and then in the end say that the Taiwanese people conducted a referendum and we want independence. So it's his way of moving closer to independence, but he doesn't want to do that straight out. So he says, okay, we'll do a referendum on these. But then if you look at the topics, referendum should be topics that concern the people, but his topics are all about whether we want peace, or if mainland China establishes, if they have missiles on the coast, what do we want to do? Do we want peace or not? So it's really irrelevant for referendum topics. And so I guess by the referendum not being valid itself, it's significant in that at least we know that in Taiwan, more than half of the people are still those who want to remain status quo, or at least they're not manipulated by him and his referendum thing. So that's why I think it's more important. And that's why I also think that for mainland China's side, they care more about the referendum than who becomes president, because if the referendum does pass, Chen Shui-bian can be showing mainland China, see, the majority of people are on my side, and yes, they are they do in the end they do want independence, because it means that he can rouse more than 50% of the people and get them to do what he wants them to do.
What would this particular referendum have given them power to do?
I'm sorry?
If this referendum had passed, what power would it have given?
It would give him, in the future, he could always declare a state of emergency. Because now he's saying Taiwan is in a state of emergency. That's why he said he could conduct this referendum. Or else he shouldn't be able to. And so, like, he could always say, okay, we're having another referendum because it's a state of emergency, because according to him, we're supposedly still, like, in war or something with mainland China. And so if he declares another state of emergency and uses another referendum, in that case, that may not just be like a referendum of irrelevant issues. He might be, oh, are you willing for Taiwan to become independent? And so it's going to be using the people to decide whether or not you have independence. And the reason why it's irrelevant is because referendums are supposed to be things that the people start, like the people should start themselves and sign petitions and ask the government to conduct it for them. Like, in East Timor when they want independence or not. But then in his case, he just like does it himself. He uses his presidential power. And so I think that is what, like, that's another significance of this election, but mostly people only talk about the presidential election.
Specifically, what this referendum had allowed him, what would it have allowed him to do specifically?
Well, with this referendum, nothing really, because his referendum really didn't call for any actions. For this referendum, it really was nothing, because it was all about whether people in Taiwan wanted peace. It was nothing having to do with actions on behalf of the government or anything. But the significance would just be like he could in the future also use the same measures to conduct referendums. So I think it's not the referendum itself that has any significance, and that's why it was really hard. He also tied it with the presidential election, and the way how he did it was very undemocratic, because the way how he did it, basically, you go up, and if you don't take the referendum ballot, that means people already know that you're not supportive of referendum, and if you're not, that mostly means that you're on the blue camp. And so it takes a lot of effort and courage for people to actually go into the voting office, the ballot offices, and say, whether I want to take this ballot or not. Because they did it in a way how you have to show and claim whether you want to vote for the referendum. And then by either voting or either by taking or not taking the referendum, they already know which side you're on.
What's the big deal if they know what side you're on?
Well, but because if you're doing election and referendums, it's supposed to be anonymous, right? I mean, like, even for democracy, like, people are not supposed to know, like, who you voted for, but by tying the referendum with the election, they already know who you voted for by whether you took or have not taken the referendum ballot. That's pretty much it is, because that's why he wanted to tie it with the presidential thing, because he knows that if he doesn't, even fewer people are going to actually go and make the effort of doing the referendum. But this way, he'll at least get more than the usual amount of people to take the ballot, and if they do, whether or not they vote for it is their thing. But if the number of the voting population actually exceeds 50%, and then most of the people are the green camp, then the referendum passes. And so in the future, he can do the same thing.
So once this referendum passes, then he can just do whatever he wants, is what you're saying?
Pretty much, he can do the same thing in the future. Because that means the people, if the referendum was valid, and because mostly it was like the majority, 90-something% was the green camp, and if it passes, that means that the people in Taiwan are willing to do what Chen Shui-bian wants them to do. That means that they'll actually do, and he can manipulate the people then if it passes. That means in the future he has even greater possibilities of doing so.
But does each specific thing he's proposing, doesn't it require another vote, or?
No, yeah, it does, but then if it's like this time, he just has to say it's a state of emergency, so they're doing referendum, whereas before, referendums should have to come through petitions and having people vote for it on it first.
So if this referendum had passed and he wanted to have another referendum,
he could also just say it's a state of emergency, and then without having the people petition it themselves, he could just directly say, you're all going to vote on this referendum.
Okay,
and then because the blue camp, or at least, people who are not Chen Shui-bian's people, they feel like the referendums is just ridiculous and irrelevant to this whole thing, so they don't want to actually even cast the ballot. But then by not casting it, the majority of the people who vote for the referendum are the green side, and so of course the referendums will pass. And that's why it's actually surprising that this time the referendum was invalid, because I think most of the people on the blue side expected the blue camp to become president, but the referendum to pass, because they didn't think so many people would be willing to just publicly say, no, I don't want to take the referendum ballot.
What was the percentage of the number of people who voted for the referendum?
Well, the referendum was 43%, so it didn't pass the 50%. And then out of the 43, like 97 voted for the referendum, and there was still 3% that said no to the referendum. But the referendum itself didn't exceed 50% of the population. So that's
Okay, so your main criticism of people
why
asking
yeah.
is because that's an invasion of privacy.
Well, yeah. Well, the way how he did it, because if you actually follow up on if you actually follow up on Chen Shui-bian's his whole process of bringing the referendum for people to vote on, you'll see that he tried many different ways. And in the beginning, he had different plans of how to conduct it, just so he could get the most people to vote for it. But then later on, in the end, like, I remember he went through some other things, but I can't remember quite correctly. But in the end, he thought the best way is to tie it with a presidential election. And so, because he wanted to guarantee as many people to vote for so that it'll pass, and he knows that the people who go and vote for the majority will be like his people.
So let's say this one had passed, then you must have another referendum. Doesn't it still need 50% again?
Well, it does, but the problem is, like this time, it was really close.
43%.
43%. It was very close, and it was because the blue camp during their campaign, they tried to tell, like you were there, you probably noticed, they tried to tell people not just to vote no on the referendum, but you don't even take the ballot. Because the minute you take the ballot, even if you make it invalid, it already adds up to the number of people who who participated in the referendum. That's why they want people to not even take the ballot.
So, but I don't see how this gives him if it had passed, how does that give him an advantage later? It means you're saying.
Oh, if it has passed, because everyone knows that these two issues are not legitimate referendum issues. But if it had passed, that means Chen Shui-bian could always do this, and because of the way using the popular sentiments, he could always, in the future, do another referendum, and then.
So sort of like a precedent would have been set.
More like a precedent, but also it's more like saying the population in Taiwan actually supports him, and the majority, like over 50%. And that is why he could then use that and show, mainland China and be like, you know what, more than 50% of people are supportive of these referendums, and all of these, the referendum, the issues themselves. Right now, it's not about independence or anything, but it's kind of about, whether we want peace if mainland China has missiles and stuff. So it's kind of irrelevant to the whole referendum itself. But then in the future, he could always move it closer, step by step, closer to the independence issue. And then he could always say, you know what, the people here, this is what they want, because more than 50% did it. So it's kind of setting a precedence, and also saying that the people are on his side, and that's what he really wants.
If this referendum had passed, wouldn't it have allowed him to defend against the missiles specifically?
Well, but he didn't say any measures to be taken on the Taiwanese side. That's what made it very vague. His whole referendum was just about whether we're peace-loving people, and if the other side does anything, do we still want peace? And so I don't think his thing was on any measures taken if anything were to happen, but it's more like setting a precedence and saying that he has the people on his side, and he can get the people to do what he wants them to do.
So, but can't he just have future referendums anyway?
He could, but now, because it doesn't, the thing is, I think during the campaign periods, he had placed a referendum on a platform that's like, he said he valued the referendum more than he valued his own presidency. Like, that's the way how he showed the Taiwanese public. And so by having the referendum not pass and him become president, it's actually a slap on his own face. It's like saying, this is what you pushed for the most and it didn't pass. And that's another thing that the blue camp used, because the blue camp said those who actually would take the referendum ballot are the ones who definitely voted for Chen Shui-bian. And if they didn't take the ballot, that means most likely 99.9% they also didn't vote for Chen Shui-bian. And so there's actually a discrepancy between the referendum and the presidential results. So that's another thing that the blue camp used, as you can't really say it's enough to prove that he fixed it, but it's also another thing that they said, why is there such a discrepancy? Because Chen Shui-bian himself pushed more for the referendum than for his own presidency.
So if 43% took the referendum ballot, then and they got
97% out of that, yeah.
So you can assume all those are, you can almost assume that most of those are green. Right?
Oh yeah, and those who said no could either be ones who are still green but just didn't like the referendum, or it could be ones who just didn't want to publicly say, I don't want the ballot. So they took the ballot and said no.
Okay, so let's say for the sake of argument, all 43% of those were green. Okay, somehow they still got up to 50% on the presidential election.
Okay.
Okay, right?
Yeah.
Officially.
Yeah.
Okay, so couldn't people on the green side have not picked up the referendum ballots and only voted for the president?
They could, but it's because this is also based on assuming that throughout his whole campaign, he had really pushed for the referendum, and they had all these like referendum campaigns on its own. Just like pretty much he valued that more than himself. I don't know, but I just feel like if you were a hardcore green, you would definitely also be voting yes on the referendum because your president is already placing it higher than the presidency itself. And so
I still think it's possible that you could be pro-green and not vote for the referendum, though.
Well, you can not vote for it, but usually I don't think you'll be pro-green and not even take it. Because you're already there. Like, you take it along with, it's at the same place where you conduct.
If you accept the ballot in the first place,
exactly,
then that gets added up into the 43%.
Exactly. You can even say, you can take the ballot and make it invalid, like tear it up. That is still, you've already taken it. Because that just makes it invalid. So in order to not take it, they ask you, do you want it? And you say no. And so they, like, on the registration thing, they say, okay, you didn't take it. And I know that before the March 20th, Chen Shui-bian tried to pass a lot of different legislations to how to incorporate referendum into this whole election. He tried different methods, and some were just like shot down by the blue camp. But this one finally was one that both sides said, okay, you know what, we can deal with this, because he insisted on doing a referendum along with the president.
So, do you think the discrepancy between the percentage on the referendum votes and the presidential election, does that lead you to believe that the presidential election was fixed?
Well, I don't think that's sufficient to lead me to. It's just another factor. But I just think that, I just feel like a lot of people, when they see the results of that election, they focus on Chen Shui-bian, and on the blue side, they're like, oh my gosh, this is the end of Taiwan, blah, blah, blah. But then I just think that they should also look at the referendum and understand that, what, Chen Shui-bian has already been president for 4 years, another 4 years with him. I just feel like they should also look at the referendum and notice that significance, and that the fact that less than 50% of people took the referendum means that the people in Taiwan aren't as easily manipulated as some outsiders may think they are by Chen Shui-bian. And so it's not the end of the world or the end of Taiwan.
Do you think outsiders feel that Taiwanese people are very easily manipulated by Chen Shui-bian?
I think now, especially after that election, it does seem more common. It's like I feel like after election, more people I talk to, they feel like the people in Taiwan are easily manipulated. Not outsiders, like foreigners, because I don't know how much they know about it, like generally, but just people, maybe even Taiwanese people who are now living here, who are maybe on the blue side, they feel like, gosh, what's going on with the people in Taiwan? Like, how could they just be led by this person and believe everything he does, like even with the gunshot? And I feel like after election, definitely more people are questioning that.
Okay, what other... let's finish our financially. As far as the possibility of war, do you think the referendum passing, do you think that might actually lead to conflict if it had passed?
I think with that passing, if that had passed, it would lead more likely to tension on the mainland side, whereas it not passing, although like outsiders and foreign media, they're saying, oh, mainland China, they're already geared up, ready to fight. But I still feel like with that not passing, the tension has definitely loosened up a lot on mainland China's side. And that's why they didn't really make any comments on the whole election issue. Because for them, what they were really worried about was the referendum, and now it's it was invalid, and so they really didn't need to worry about it anymore. So yeah, I feel like if the referendum had passed and the potential of what the referendum could do and where it could lead Chen Shui-bian and the people in Taiwan, I think mainland China will be much more concerned about it if it had passed. But now, just like what Professor Oy said the other day, it's like, I don't know, for people in Taiwan, because it seems like politics in Taiwan and mainland, this issue is like everything. Our whole life is about this. Whereas on mainland China's side, they really have a lot more to think about. They have their own country to run, the economy. Like Taiwan is just another issue, and I just feel like a lot of people think that's what all mainland China is thinking about, like, how to reunify. And I mean, it is one of their issues, but they still have a lot other things to think about and to deal with. Like they have their own country to run, and so other than Taiwan, like different from Taiwan, the leaders of mainland China, they'll keep an eye out, but I don't think that war is what they want to do. Like their optimal choice is definitely not war. And so that's why the leadership, they kept on saying they'll try everything they can to prevent a military reunification. But that is under, of course, one criteria, that is if Taiwan doesn't declare independence. But if you declare independence, then they're like, no.
I heard that at certain polling stations, people were not given the referendum ballots. Like they came in and voted for the president, and
they didn't give it to them.
Yeah, the administrative people at the polling station simply wouldn't give it to them. Say thank you for your time. You're down here.
Well, I think that is possible because some of the people at the polling station are probably the blue camp, and they want to try and just get however few people to vote for the referendum. But then people in the green camp, they already know that there is this referendum going on. So I'm sure if they were hardcore and they really asked for it, I think if they had asked for it, there's no way how you can't give it to them. But it is also very likely that people who work in the polling station wanted to try and decrease the number of people who would get the polling. I mean, if they were on the blue side. That is possible.
So, what other factors lead you to believe that the presidential election was fixed?
Well, I think there are many things, just like from his gunshot to begin with, and then the late results, with the results coming out really late, and then
What do you mean late?
Well, just how the results were supposed to come out. It came out an hour after the predestined time, and so with very few polls left to recount the votes. I mean, it's just like there were already a few polls left to be counted, and then that took them double the amount of time to do the rest of the island, which means that something was going on. And then also just the matter of and also from news, there were a lot of instances where they see just irregularities happening in the voting places, but then because the officials there were on the green side, they said, oh no, it's okay, we'll let them do it. For example, the two girls who went to vote, and they said, oh, these two girls, they were helping their grandmother to vote. But then, and then there were other instances where there were just people seeing others actually literally taking more than two and then just putting it in. Or the chops, one side and the other, and if you use one side of the chop, it actually turns out to be invalid, and the other side is the one that's actually the valid one. And it's just, there are a lot of these different things that all add up to make me kind of doubt and question the whole election. And especially then, if nothing was fixed, if it was a just and rightful election, why wouldn't he go for a recount immediately? Because the longer he delays it, then it just means that it kind of makes people question what are you hiding? And the longer it takes, the more uncertainties can happen between this time.
What do you think about the amendment he tried to pass to automatically recount elections where the difference is less than 1%?
He tried to. I'm not too clear about that amendment. What was that amendment about?
He tried to pass a new amendment to immediately recount the ballots if the difference is less than 1%.
But would it apply to, the current?
Retroactively to this current election.
Well then, so he's saying that if it passes, then they will do a total recount of this, because I'm not sure about that amendment. I didn't follow up on it lately.
The Hand-Blue Clamp considered it to be a delaying measure and said that the president could recount the ballots immediately if he really wanted to.
That's true. But I mean, if he does put it in, that's good for future, and it's also good for now. But I mean, now if he really wants to recount it, he does have the power to just say call for it and total recount. So I guess you can say that it is a delay measure, or just trying to reinstate himself as someone who follows the law.
So you're saying that people spotted voting irregularities in the South?
A lot of people spotted voting irregularities, and also just the amount. I mean, it was 330 invalid votes, was it? 330,000. Yeah, 330,000. And it's just the proportion, the ratio of invalid votes to the difference between the two camps' vote. And also, someone compared it with 4 years ago, when it was just like 170,000, yeah. And so it's just like the amount of invalid votes. Are you saying that the people in Taiwan don't know how to vote? Because this is
Well, no, they said they had stricter standards.
That's true, but then stricter standards by what means? And also, there were people who, at the polling places, when they were calling out the votes, I mean, later on there were cases where they said that they look at the vote and they will first call out, oh, this is Lian Zhan, and then they're like, oh, no, it's Chen Shui-bian. Or then they would look at it and then they'll say, oh no, because they can have double standards for invalid votes, and it's just like, by what standard? And they say, of course, now they say it's, oh, we're enforcing stricter standards, but by what? And then you have to be stricter on both sides. You can't just be stricter with one side's vote and the other side you just totally accept it. So that's really hard to say.
So what specific voting irregularities are you talking about? People voting twice?
People actually putting in more than one ballot, which they've seen, and then if someone tries to point out, the officials there say no. And also just the chop. They noticed that at certain polling offices in, I think it was Keelung, the chops actually had two ends, and if you use one end, it turns out to be an invalid mark because it's not clear enough. And so they had a feeling that they put these chops in and they put these chops into, this is what they're assuming, they put these chops into places with with a higher blue camp population, so that there's a higher possibility for the blue camp people to use the other end. But that's just an assumption. And then, of course, with the two girls, I think the two girls is another case that the media spotted, because someone was videotaping and then they saw these two girls voting, casting votes, and then the wife of the xianzhang Furen was there, and she's like, oh yeah, they're doing it for their grandma. And so that was another one. And there were just random others that people called in. I mean, that could happen for all elections, but it's just now, since people are just really frustrated at the results, they want to report as many as possible, I guess. So they're all revealing it, but. And I think it's just before the election, and people had all their hopes up high and thinking that, the blue camp already has this amount of lead. And I think it's just the way how the votes turned out to be, because I didn't get to see the TV and see the immediate results, but from what our friends said, in the beginning, the blue camp had a pretty huge lead in front of the green camp, and then just all of a sudden, I think after they got the votes from a certain place, it just totally changed. And which made them feel really just weird, the way how it changed. It seemed like just things had been fixed, and then suddenly it turned out to be. Not from a particular county. It was after a certain time where suddenly none of those started coming in, and then not from a county but just from an area, it just started coming in, and it wasn't even an area with green voters. It was the later ones, the ones in the north, and so that's why they felt really weird about this whole thing.
You're saying some of the polling stations in the north?
They were the last ones. There were some of the last ones coming in because they had bigger populations.
And they were heavily in
And they were
favor.
actually, that was actually what brought the green camp up. And that was actually what took double the amount of time, the one I was telling you.
Okay.
So that's what made people question. And I think it's just, there are a lot of things about this election that made people question that. I mean, the shooting itself, but I don't know. Henry Lee, I don't know if he'll come up with anything.
I thought I just assumed the voting irregularities were from the south, the green polling stations. But how could they have, if the polling stations in the north are administratively controlled by the blue, how could they?
Well, supposing they're administered by the blue, but they were saying that in the end, you know, we don't know what's been going on in the process of fixing or actually bringing it to the did you say CEC, the Central Election?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it was someone. I think one of Phoenix TV, the TV commentator said that the CEC had always showed a lead for green in front of the blue, whereas for a lot of the other media, they showed a lead of blue in front of the green. And they said that's natural because it's a discrepancy between all of these. But then they said, strangely enough, when Chen Shui-bian realized that he had won, he stood out and he said, "Oh, I was really nervous for the first half of this election because I thought that I was going to lose because, you know, I saw all these like results and I was losing." But then they're saying, no, if you would have seen CECs, you would have known that you were leading the whole time, which means that there must be something wrong with either, you know, the CECs just making things up, or you yourself know that you're losing and the CECs just saying that you're winning. So it's like even his own, what he said in the end didn't match up with the CEC's result, because he said that he thought he was losing, which is what a lot of the media had shown, but CEC itself had shown that Chen Shui-bian had a lead in front of the blue camp.
The whole time?
CEC actually starting from the middle and like just before everyone else, CECs had shown a little lead for the green camp. So he himself was not right.
Wait, so why are the president's comments that he thought he was losing, why does that make you think twice?
Well, I think that just makes me think that either he himself didn't. Well, first of all, that probably indicates that he knew he was losing to begin with, and so for the CEC to say that he had a lead, that's a discrepancy, because are you just, you know, reporting false votes or what's going on? And by him actually saying that he was worried, that means that he knew that the blue camp was ahead of him. So it's just like, I think that puts doubt on the CEC's reporting of whether they're actually truthful, the counts that they're generating.
Don't you think the president himself just
trying to be modest?
Yeah.
Probably, but you know, if that's not the truth, because he said, if you were leading, why would you would just be worried because you had a very small lead, but you wouldn't be worried because you were behind. But according to him, he was worried because he was behind, which is what the rest of the media said he was. So that's just that's not a major like cause to say that he had fixed the votes, but it's just another little discrepancy.
I mean, because he could have known he was winning and just said later, "Oh, I thought it was losing," just to.
Well, but he didn't say he thought he was, though. He said he was. He thought I was really worried, and I didn't think I would win because I was behind. And so by saying that he was behind, that must have meant he thought, or like he really, he knew, or he thought that he was really behind. But if you look at CEC, which is the official result, he shouldn't be, because he was leading. Even if just leading by very little, he was still leading. So he shouldn't have said, you know, that means he himself was doubting, and something went on between like his doubting and then the end result.
Maybe he was just watching the wrong channel.
Maybe, and maybe, you know, just the media, they're being really critical, because now, I mean, Phoenix TV is one that's made basically blue camp, and so they're just being really, really critical at what Chen Shui-bian is saying, and just trying to pick out bones just to say, oh, you know, this doesn't match. But
which television station conducted that poll?
That I really am not sure, but I'm sure you can find it online.
What's the name of?
Or actually, I could go try it. I don't know in English, but Chinese it's called 出口民调.
Okay, could you describe what?
出口民调 is basically after every presidential election they will conduct it, and it's called 出口 because it's after they conduct the poll after you've already casted your vote, and they catch you outside and they ask you who you voted for, and so normally that's been considered the most like legitimate poll, and it's supposed to be the most accurate and most credible. But this time, the 出口民调 said that the blue camp had a lead, and so people thought the blue camp was winning. But then the end result was totally different from the 出口民调.
What were they reporting?
What were they reporting?
Yeah, a lead of what?
Oh, blue camp had a lead in the presidential election. The blue camp was winning by Oh, you're saying how much the blue camp led by between 6 to 10%? 6 to 10%. 6 to 10%. And so it was not a small lead. It was actually a big lead.
Okay, you have to say that kind of all over again continuously.
Oh, okay. So the 出口民调 is this poll that the media, I'm not sure which one, but we can check that up again. It's the media would catch the people once they've already cast their vote in the ballot offices, and usually it's considered the most accurate and the most credible one because it's after people already cast their vote. And this year they said that their result was the blue camp had a lead over the green camp of 6 to 10%. But the end result was totally different, and so that's another thing that really threw people off, because normally the 出口民调had been very credible, and you could pretty much predict the result from the 出口民调.
Yeah, and what did they report in 2000?
Well, in 2000, they said that Chen Shui-bian had a lead over the other two, Song Chu-yi and Lian Zhan, and they said that he would become the president, which was true. It came true. And so I think in a way, although it is conducted by media and the media may have a certain slant towards the political situation, but since that, 4 years ago they did say Chen Shui-bian won, which means that they're reporting pretty much factually reporting it, and so they're still willing to admit when green camp wins. So you can't really say, oh, because they said blue camp wins this time, that they're totally completely for blue.
What's your feeling on the Central Election Commission?
The Central Election, that I really don't know. I don't have much to say. I just feel like even now with the Central Election Commission, I just feel like they're not organizations that actually has any real power now. Like anything that they do or anything they say, I just feel like it might be manipulated or influenced by Chen Shui-bian and his people, and just like I don't know how much credibility I can give them anymore, and so whatever they say, I really won't just take it as like, oh, it's the official statement, it's the truth of fact. Just like I think I've kind of lost some credibility for them, but other than that, I don't know much about the CEC itself.
Because the green camp, when they want to state that the election is valid, they simply state that the Central Election Commission has stated the official election results and that they are a neutral entity.
Well, yeah.
This is the official result, so therefore the election is official.
Mm-hmm. Well, the CEC has always been the official, like they have been the organ that gives out official election results. But whether or not they're neutral this time, I don't know. I mean, they could still be neutral, and it's just like the votes were fixed. But I don't know where they stand. But they have always been like the official results for the elections. So that is true. And I mean, the Green Party would love to use them as someone that backs them up, because I mean, the CEC did say that Chen Shui-bian won, and so for Chen Shui-bian, it is like this supposedly neutral and official organ just declared that I won, so therefore I must have won.
How is it possible that if the North polling stations came in last, how did that suddenly shift the advantage? What do you think happened there?
Well, that shouldn't, and that's why it's very mind-boggling. But then the fact that it did, it just has to lead one to wonder, whether something has been going on. Either those have been fixed, or it's just they have just added other votes in favor of the green camp in this process. So it may not be that the blue ballot boxes were fixed, but it's just that in the process they have added a lot more of their own, the green camp's ballots. Because suddenly during that time, you know, in the process of shifting up north, the green side actually gained a lot more votes.
Which is actually mathematically impossible because the northern polling stations are predominantly blue.
Exactly. And so if after the south ones were already open and that was, you know, the blue had a lead, then one would assume that then it's safer for the blue to just maintain the lead.
We would have a greater lead after the northern polling stations.
Exactly.
Do you have any speculation on the relationship between the president, the courts, and the Central Election Commission?
I don't know. That I really don't know. Other than maybe he has his own just interest groups. I don't know, but I don't.
Because the courts are saying that you cannot. In the beginning, they were saying that you cannot do a recount unless you have proof of misconduct.
Or if the president has an urgent emergency decree that says you may recount. I get first, which he wouldn't give out.
Yeah. Despite the fact that there were.
Yeah, that's true. The court has been kind of uncooperative towards the blue camp.
What does that lead you to believe?
I can only say that maybe, you know, either the people who are running the highest court, the Supreme Court in Taiwan right now, are people with Chen Shui-bian, or just they still have political interests that they still wish to maintain, and seeing the situation, they feel like it's better if Chen Shui-bian maintains in power, or it's just they just don't want to mess with this. So they just follow by the normal procedure and just don't want to create any possibilities.
Is it believable to you that the reason why the CEC, by their statements and action as well as the courts, are swayed towards the green side because they have been appointed there by Li Denghui?
By Li Denghui, I think that is very likely. And well, appointed by Li Denghui, and also later on during the past 4 years when Chen Shui-bian was president, he had also made a lot of changes in the appointments and making sure that he has his people in the positions. But I don't know if the court and the CEC have been greatly affected and they have a lot of his people, but that could be a possibility of why they have been kind of swayed and slanted towards his side throughout this process of inspection.
Because Ramon Myers has basically implied that the political appointees have actually been there since Li Denghui, so I guess he's kind of saying that they were able to pull this off because of Li Denghui, like because of the people he put in there 10 years ago, not just the last 4 years.
10 years ago, I really don't think so, because if you think about 10 years ago, I think at that time Li Denghui was still not a. I think 10 years ago, let me think how old was that? He was still president, he was still KMT, so even though he did put in people of his own, I don't think there'll be people who are still very favorable towards, Chen Shui-bian. It's just, I don't think people that he put into 10 years ago will be exactly the ones that fulfill Chen Shui-bian's own political interests and still be used by him. But I don't know, maybe Ramon Myers knows some of the appointments that we don't know about.
But Chen Shui-bian is just Li Denghui's, like.
You can say that, or he has himself brought it to another level. I mean.
How do you feel about the Green Party's criticisms of the protests?
I think those. Well, I think first of all, they need to consider that if they were in the blue situation, what they would have done. And from past experiences, I think most people will say that the Green Party would have been even more aggressive and even more violent in the streets, because that was how they started. That the Green Party had always been, because before they came to power, they were the party in the streets, and that's how Chen Shui-bian himself became known, because of his his ability to take people into the streets and speeches and demonstration protests. And I think the Blue Party, I think that protesting and demonstrations is pretty much the only way for the Blue Party to express themselves now. Because if you think about it, all the legal and judicial institutions, if they're not working justly and if they're not working within the legal framework, what else can you do other than claiming your protest this way? Because obviously, just from what we've just been talking about, like the court system and all the other systems, they're all kind of swaying towards the Green Party. And so for the Blue, even if they just want for the media to know about what's going on and to express their, the unjust election, or to express their sentiments, they need to do something to catch the media's attention. And so even if you say, oh, they're staging it just so they'll get other media's attention, I mean, I think it is necessary, and I don't think it's in any way undemocratic or anything, because I just feel like actually allowing them to do that shows that Taiwan is still, the democracy is actually still there. They're not being put down by the people. But I just feel like, it is a legitimate way for the Blue camp to do it. But I just don't think it'll last very long, because it's very hard for it to last long.
You think the demonstrations?
I hope it will keep on, but I mean, personally, like, you and I, we're not there joining the demonstrations, and it's very hard for the people there to keep it up for a long time, where they have their own lives as well, like students and work.
Has the thought crossed your mind that they could protest for the next 4 years?
They probably could, and they'll probably do it on and off, and I believe some of the people will. It's just the number won't be nearly as big as the numbers when they first started, but they could definitely have smaller subgroup demonstrations on and off throughout the next 4 years. And which is another reason why I think with the referendum not passing and with all these protests and demonstrations going on, I think Chen Shui-bian in the next few years, he will definitely be not as he will definitely be not as just who he was before, because he'll see that people aren't necessarily on his side, and that he'll definitely be a lot more humbler and just be discreet, and maybe even just less outspoken and conceited, whereas before he was definitely just, whereas before the election, even if the referendum had won, he's going to think that he controls all the people here in Taiwan. But now it just tells him that, the truth is he doesn't, and he'll just be a lot more careful about what he says and does in the next 4 years as president. Which I hope. I mean, he might not, because knowing him, he doesn't follow the normal procedure.
Okay, so what do you think this has done to Taiwan's democratic progress?
Well, I think for Taiwan, democratic progress itself, I think it has more of an impact on, I don't know, this is probably stretching it, but I feel like Taiwan has always been like the poster child for the United States, showing other countries, this is what, democracy is, and we have successfully installed democracy into this Eastern country. But then, I don't know, I just feel like what has been going on in Taiwan is more of an impact on the United States, showing like democracy and introducing democracy to other regions. And so, because this has definitely shown people, at least for those regions in the world who are not democratic yet, for them, they kind of see another negative side of democracy, or more like they see that democracy isn't necessarily the solution to all problems, because they see that things can still be fixed, you can still have corruption, you can still have staged things, your president can still manipulate people. And so I guess for them, it's just an eye-opener, and for them to see that, democracy, this is what can also happen in a democratic country. And so by what's going on in Taiwan, I think Taiwan's democracy will not just go downhill. I think it'll just, because Taiwan is in another undemocratic country, right now there will really be riots and really be like violence, or maybe even people dying from the mobs. But then now if you look at it, people are just really just demonstrating and protesting, and what they're doing are still pretty much following the procedures of demonstrations and protesting, which is not what democracy does not allow for. And so, and as for the president's like staged, or if we so call it a staged shooting, and the fixing of ballot, I mean, these are things that it's not new. And so I really don't think that it will really bring Taiwan backwards in any way. It's just, I think more of it just shows the rest of the world that sometimes, democracy can go wrong as well. So.
What do you mean it's not new? What is that?
Well, I mean, like, fixing votes. I know that previous in elections in Taiwan, there were also instances where people say, oh, no, these have been fixed. But then, because they're not so, I guess those elections weren't significant enough, and the staging of votes weren't as big of a deal back then because it wasn't the presidential thing. Or I mean, it's just like the gun thing is kind of out of the normal though. But the gun thing, it's more of a, I mean, it is Chen Shui-bian that we're dealing with. And if you look into his past, he has been trying to do he can manipulate people well, and he'll do anything in order to do it. And so I just feel like it is to be expected from Chen Shui-bian, and he was worried because he kind of knew that he was losing, and so he had to do something. And I mean, well, in the past, just when he was trying to run for a mayor position, the mayor of Tainan position, and he
was it a magistrate?
It was a 县长, yeah, it was a magistrate position. And so he said that he claimed that he was food poisoned, and he said that he was food poisoned by the KMT, but that was already after the KMT won, and then later investigation found out that he was lying. He was not food poisoned by the KMT, so the election itself was not overturned.
How did they find out that he was lying? How did they prove that?
I don't know about the specific progress, but I know they went through investigation and they found out that KMT had nothing to do with it. But as to how they did it, I don't know.
So he was actually food poisoned?
I don't even know. I think he claimed he was food poisoned, but to what degree? I don't know what degree. It was a while ago when he was still running for magistrate of Tainan. So
okay,
that was.
So what's the conspiracy theory on his wife being in a wheelchair?
Well, the conspiracy theory is that with the food poisoning and now with the gunshot, some people are saying that they feel like the car accident that disabled his wife was actually also staged by Chen Shui-bian, and that he had only intended to gain the sympathy from the population by saying that KMT had intended to, run a car over his wife, and he actually only meant it for a minor accident, but then ended up being a major one that permanently disabled his wife. But it's just like, following the lines with food poisoning, he also tried to blame it on the KMT, saying that they did it to his wife, whereas that was also after the election. And so there really is no reason why the KMT would do that after the election, when the election itself said that the KMT had won. And so some people are saying that now when they look back, they feel like that was also staged by Chen Shui-bian, since he seems to be someone who will do anything to pull it off.
Was the car accident around the time of an election?
The car accident was, yes, but I forgot which election it was. It was also around an election.
His election.
His election, which he also lost. But then because of this thing, I'm not sure about the details of what exactly happened, but it was also an election that he was afraid of losing. And so he said the KMT did that.
Oh, his wife must be pissed, man.
So that's another why some people are speculating that his wife knows all these secrets about him, the things that he did, these stunts that he pulled in the past, that if she wanted to, she could really just, uncover like all these things. And so that's why she has a really tight hold on him and control over him, and just how he assigns people to different government posts, and just whatever she wants him to do, as he basically follows her orders, because he has a lot of secrets in her hands which she could definitely use. But that's another speculation.
Did you know that stage assassination attempt was predicted by analysts a week before the election?
His was predicted.
There were a certain number of tricks that the Green Party could use.
Yeah, because my mom didn't know about these predictions, but the night before, she was talking to my uncle, and she said, you know what? The most dramatic thing that could happen right now is an assassination attempt on Chen Shui-bian and Liu Xiulian. And then it came true the next night. And so I know that there were people like my mom, they're probably saying it, and because, I mean, that's also considering Chen Shui-bian's past. So it is after considering like the food poisoning and also what he'll do to reach his goal. Like that's why people think that Chen Shui-bian is capable of conducting these things and staging these things.
It is the belief of people on the green side that it is not in Chen Shui-bian's character to do these kind of things. I have personally been disputed for my claims because they've said that's not his character. Why do you think people on the green side believe that it's not his character to do these things?
Well, I think overall, in general, on the green side, they feel like he is a very good president who cares about his people, and he is very honest and truthful, and he represents like the lower classes and lower levels and just down to earth. And so for them, it is very hard to think that Chen Shui-bian will stage anything to use the people or even to fool the people. And they feel like KMT just wants, or the blue camp just wants to say that just so they can put Chen Shui-bian in a bad position. But then, I just think they are so, people in the green camp, they're just very, I don't know, they probably just, they're kind of blinded in a way. They only see Chen Shui-bian the way how they want to see him, and so they refuse to take in any other perspectives. And so they don't see what outsiders or anyone other than their own little group feels about Chen Shui-bian and the country itself. And so that's why when they say it, they probably genuinely do believe that no, it is out of his character to do anything like that. Because for them, it's probably impossible for them to can do anything like that.
Do you feel that way about his supporters on Taiwan, or also Taiwanese Americans in the United States that support him?
I think it's probably, well, I haven't come in touch with a lot of Taiwanese Americans here who are supportive of Chen Shui-bian, but I think it's just because of the people I'm associated with. But from some of the incidences I've heard from my parents' friend's friend, I feel like it's the same way. But as to what extent, I'm not so clear because I personally have not, I don't really know anyone that well who are on that side.
Well, those are the people I associate with, and that's basically what they believe. So do you consider yourself to be Taiwanese American or Chinese American?
Well, I've always considered myself Chinese in like a greater way. I was born in Taiwan, so of course I'm also Taiwanese. But when people ask me, I still say, oh, I'm Chinese, because then I feel like if you're a foreigner, if you ask me, I say I'm Chinese, and then if you're a Chinese and you ask me, I'm like, oh, I'm Taiwanese. Because I just feel like it's a smaller division from a broader Chinese identity. And so that's just the way how I like introduce myself.
Do you feel that the conflict between the blue and green camps, what impact do you think the conflict between the blue and green camps has on Asian America in terms of Taiwanese Americans and Chinese Americans who support these political parties?
I just think the more they try to the more separated the blue camp and the green camp become on the island, it just makes the gap greater between the people abroad who are in different camps. And also the more they focus on just the whole issue of green or blue, it just makes even US and China relation become kind of a little bit focused on Taiwan. I don't know, I just feel like they're politicizing everything and just ignoring a lot of the other things that could be done to actually make Taiwan better, like economy-wise and everything else, industries, developments, but they've just been politicizing everything so much that it's now become their whole concern is about whether you're green or blue, which is whether you love Taiwan or you don't love Taiwan, which is kind of ridiculous. And because they do it, it's more of it spreads to even the people abroad, expatriates, and then also it spreads to the relationship between United States and China, because now it seems like it just feels like the only thing that everyone else is concerned about has to be on Taiwan. It's kind of very, I don't know, self-centered way of thinking. But.
What was your immediate reaction to the shooting?
My immediate reaction to the shooting was, first of all, oh my gosh, how could it be true? Because my mom was just predicting it and was it supposed to be a joke? And then my second reaction was, when I saw it online, I actually thought it was, I didn't think anyone assassinated him, but I thought it was an accident because the immediate news that I saw was that when his car was going through the streets, they were firing those firecrackers, those like shooting kinds. And so my immediate reaction was, it's got to be one of those. But then when he insisted on being a gunshot and then saying how it scraped, and then just the more stories that came up about it, about how like it turned around and stuff like that in all directions, it just made me question more. But in the beginning, I really thought that it was an accident from those firecrackers. And then when stories come up like this, and then when he insists on saying that, oh yeah, it is a, when he insisted on that it was an assassination, but then when you look at it, and then considering that he was in the hospital for what, 4 hours, but then he came out and it was just a scrape, and then it was just like everything that added up led me to kind of question even more. So now I don't even think it's an accident. Now I think it's staged. But you know, probably it was still, I don't know. I just at first I really thought it was an accident, but just not an assassination.
Yeah, okay, so like what's your response to that counterpoint? That's, I don't see how that shooting could be staged because he's in a moving jeep. It's too risky.
Okay, so then my response is, I don't think staging necessarily means someone actually did shoot him when he was in the jeep. I feel like it could have done, the shot may have been done before, or you know, either from inside, but that'll depend on what Henry Lee says after the investigation. But staging it doesn't necessarily mean his own people like shot it while he was on the jeep, while the jeep was going. It could have done before, or in some other ways that we just don't know how he did it yet.
Do you think it could have been after
or it could have been after, or it could have been after, before or after, or they already did it and they just pulled the little thing so that, you know, to make a hole. But actually, I think I read somewhere or saw some news like some days ago, and someone said if you look at the video recording of Chen Shui-bian's parade that day, they saw one of his security people holding a handbag, a black handbag, and with a little opening that looked like the bullet, the gun barrel. But I don't know. They're just saying that they feel like the security person was trying to make a shot.
Someone made a testimony with their head wrapped up completely, so you could not identify with them, that the shot came from inside the jeep. That's why there's a bullet hole there, and the security person shot it from their black purse or whatever.
But I think that's why I said the investigation report by Henry Lee is going to be very crucial, because he's going to pretty much make the verdict on the direction of the bullet, where it came from, and you know, whether it's from inside or out, or outside and in. But even if he says the bullet did came from the outside and in, I still think it doesn't necessarily mean that was a real shot. It could have still been staged before or after. You know, the shot could have made.
He still could have been shot before or after.
Or after, exactly. And so, but it's just if the investigation report says that the bullet came from the inside, then it's definitely a staged attempt.
I believe he's already confirmed that the bullet came from
Exactly.
outside.
He said it's outside, and he actually said it was a toy. It was like a toy gun, like transfer. It was adopted, like one of those. He said it's a gun that's almost impossible to buy outside of Taiwan. It's one of those like locally made, except it's also like a transformation of a toy gun. But I didn't really understand that report, but he said certain stuff about that.
So what's the point of his
So he still didn't. The report's going to come out, he said, after May 20th. He said it's impossible for it to come out before May 20th.
Now, Dr. Henry Lee is a forensics expert. Is he allowed, is it within his jurisdiction, so to speak, to say that there's no way he could have been shot that way?
I don't think well, I feel like I think what he says should be considered very much credible, and it is. Well, I mean, if his investigation report says no, if he merely comments on the possibility of a bullet, you know, being shot this way, or what kind of bullet it was, and then merely looking at the facts and the evidence, then I think it is completely within jurisdiction to say whether or not it is possible. But then again, if you politicize it into, oh, what party he is, then of course people can start discrediting him and questioning him again. And that's why when someone interviewed him, he specifically says, oh, I have good friends on both sides, so please don't politicize this again. Like, please don't make me into a Green Party person or a Blue Party person. because I think that'll, depending on what his results are, he's definitely going to be labeled friends for one side and enemies of the other side.
Poor guy.
So it's a very hard situation for him.
Well, I don't know, it seems like common sense because everybody on the blue side already knows that there's no way he could have been shot that way, right? So we're just waiting for an expert to see. You
need an outside expert, according to the.
According to what?
According to popular sentiment, I think it's just in order to gain credibility, or to maybe just to justify the blue camp's belief. You need to find an international outside expert who will come in and actually do it unbiasedly, but I mean, yeah, the most of the.
Think that will happen?
Well, I think it'll happen, but it's just whether or not it'll have any effect on the whole situation is another case.
So, because like, as far as how can the president get shot that way, isn't that more of like a physics problem than a forensics?
Well, I think they also look into he's a forensics, but also wasn't he like, he's a forensics, but like his specialty is in gun tracks, or I don't know how to call it, but the path of bullets, a path of a bullet and guns, and so, and I mean right now neither side will believe in anyone from Taiwan, so the best thing is to find someone from abroad and have that person come in who's an internationally known expert and have that person like do it and come up with an investigation report. But still, I don't think, depending on the result, either side, there's going to be one side that's still going to discredit him, and they'll discredit him not by saying he's not professional enough, but by saying that he is politically swayed.
It's apparent to me that the president already knew that Dr. Henry Lee would be the person investigating this incident, because he actually said, I have no objection to someone like Dr. Henry Lee investigating this. Does that concern you at all as far as whether or not?
Well, actually, I didn't know about that. I didn't know about that before, but now that you said it, it kind of concerns me a bit, and also just from, I don't know, just for some of the things that it just didn't seem, well, from what you said, it kind of concerns me, and also it seems like it's taking Dr. Henry Lee an awfully long amount of time to get the investigation report out. I mean, of course, he probably doesn't think it's his priority, but concerning the situation, it would be kind of helpful if he has it done before May 20th, but he was so abstinent on saying like, no, it's not possible at all for me to get it done before May 20th. So it's kind of also concerning and agitating. I don't know which side he's on, or if he has any sides, or maybe that is the protocol for him to follow. But if you said that Chen Shui-bian said, oh yeah, I have no objections against him, and he seemed to be well aware that Dr. Henry Lee will be the person, that's kind of concerning.
No, because Chen Shui-bian's words were, I have no objection to Dr. Henry Lee coming over here and making, this is just 3 days after the election. And I was like, whoa, he already knew that was going to happen.
Yeah, that was before. Oh, wow.
That was before he was appointed?
That was before he was appointed. Yeah. Probably they were close family friends.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but even if the report comes out after May 20th, what is your concern?
Well, if Dr. Henry Lee's result is released after May 20th, then of course, and if it's in favor of the Green camp, nothing's going to happen because Chen Shui-bian is already president and everything is just the way he wanted it. But if his report is in favor of the blue camp, that'll mean that the election was annulled, and the blue camp has an even stronger base for calling for a total recount, and they're going to think that they have a legitimate reason for doing all this because an outside report already showed that it was a staged shooting. But whether or not the election will really be annulled is another case, because I don't really know the political situation in Taiwan right now. I don't really know if even if the report states that Chen Shui-bian has staged it, if that'll be enough to annul the whole election.
Legally, if you pull some kind of trick.
But see, legally it is, but then considering all that's been going on, we don't know what's going to happen. That's my concern. Because legally, a lot of things legally, if that had been legally, if a lot of things that have been going on, they should already be doing a recount. And if you had gone through the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court was cooperative enough, they should be already doing a recount. But they're not.
So you're saying that even if it's proven by an outside source that the shooting was staged, you still don't believe the election will be over?
Well, because the thing is, his report can only say it's not possible, but then I'm sure the Green camp will come up with something and say, well, there were those fireworks going on, those shooting firecracker stuff, and what if there really was an accident? They just thought it was an assassination. So then you can't really say it was staged, and they just, but it's just,
no, but he did have
he did, exactly, right? But that is if you have a country with legal systems and legal institutions where everything functions under legal institutions. But Taiwan, as of now, it's really hard. And so, but I'm sure if Dr. Henry Lee's report is in favor of the blue camp, we'll have a lot more to see. The situation in Taiwan will definitely not be over, and it'll last for a long time. But if his report is supportive of Chen Shui-bian, then I'm sure the blue camp will still continue to struggle, but it'll definitely kill off a lot of their morale.
I don't know. I wouldn't count out Dr. Henry Lee.
Yeah.
It seems. I suspect. This is going a little bit far, but I suspect that his life is in danger if he goes against them.
Yeah.
If he goes against the green side. Because of what I'm hearing as far as the way he's behaving, he seems scared.
See, that's the thing. Even if before when he took on this job, even if he wasn't predisposed anyway before he took the job, now after all that, I feel like he's definitely going to be influenced by certain factors. And it's just I feel like now even if he doesn't want to take a side, he has to. And for his own personal interest, I wonder what side he would be taking, but.
Personal interest. Personal interest is to listen to the man. If things continue down the path they've already gone, how do you feel about Taiwan having a two-party system in the future?
I think it'll definitely. Oh, you mean two-party as in just the blue and the green and just remain two-party? Or I think, well, if the election is still like this, I think it'll be even more, there'll be more cause for the people in Taiwan to want a two-party system, because it'll be more of a two-party rather than a three, because the people in the blue camp really sees the necessity for cooperation. And so it'll probably remain a stronger two-party thing instead of three-party with KMT, DPP, and then Kuomintang. They're separate ones. So I think after this incident, Taiwan's going to kind of become like United States, where the two-party is the strongest.
Do you believe that the two-party system is needed for a democratic country?
I don't know. I don't know about whether that's best for democracy, but I just think that's going to be most likely to happen, because for KMT or for Kuomintang, for them, they see that their victory will have to come from them uniting, and so whether or not it's best for democracy, I really don't know. But I just think that's what's most likely going to happen, because it's what people feel they need to do if they want to have a chance of winning over the Green Party.
So how do you feel about Taiwan having a one-party system? Do you think that would be democratic?
Well, I think one-party system, then we'll be going back to the old days when KMT was the one party in charge. And so I guess now the only party that could possibly take us back to the one-party system would be the DPP, because KMT is already out of the playing field. And so I really think that if the DPP does take Taiwan back to the past of where it's only ruled by one party, then the DPP is completely going against what it originally had try to fight against, which is, they try to fight for Taiwan's democracy and they fought against the one-party system. And if they're developing one themselves, then we can only say they're retracting back to the old KMT period.
So the result of all this is we've traded a corrupt KMT for a corrupt DPP?
Well, we've traded for a corrupt KMT, but for a DPP that's, I don't know if we call it corrupt. I'm sure they're corrupt in some way, but I think corruption is not it's probably a DPP that actually, how do you call them? Let me think. A corrupt KMT for a trickery DPP? I don't know. It's for a DPP that's...
What's the best adjective?
What's the best adjective?
A deceitful DPP?
A deceitful or a shameless. They can do anything.
How do you feel about Taiwanese Americans who support the Green Camp? How do you feel about them thinking that Taiwan is headed in the direction of democracy by their Green Camp winning?
Well, if they're people who normally live in so if they're Taiwanese Americans who barely ever go back to Taiwan and born and raised in the States, and I would say that they should definitely go back to Taiwan and look at the situation that Taiwan is in, and they'll see how much Taiwan has not been improving in the past couple of years, and they'll see that it's just like you have to go back to Taiwan in order to see how much it has not improved. And usually you would expect improvement, but now because I live in Hsinchu and I live in the science park, I go back and it's just like the whole economy and industrial development and just the market and just people's feelings towards this country is just definitely not as strong as before. And so if they're still calling here for, thinking that Taiwan's democracy is great and that the DPP is taking Taiwan on a path in the brighter future, I would say that they should definitely go back. And if they've never been back, then they shouldn't have any word on this.
In returning to the States, I told some people at the store that I went to Taiwan to observe the election, and the employee in the store said, "Oh, they won." What are your thoughts on they won? What does that really mean?
Are these people, is the person a foreigner or a Taiwanese American?
Let's assume he's Taiwanese American.
Well, I think I've actually got a few of that too, and I think, I don't know, it just seems like they feel like DPP is representative of the Taiwanese people, and then whereas KMT, they're the sort of the traitors, you can call them, or they're the mainlanders. And so when they say they won, they're saying that, oh, since Taiwan won, it must have been, DPP won, so they represent Taiwan, the Taiwanese people won. And which is just something that's just totally, it's just, for me, it's hard to believe that could ever happen, because the KMT for me has always been represented, always represents the Republic of China, which is Taiwan. And, it's like they're the ones who brought us all over to the island of Taiwan, and then now they're being named the traitor, the ones who work with the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, and the mainland China. And then whereas the DPP sort of, I don't know how they became legitimate in calling themselves like, they represent the people of Taiwan, which in fact, if you look at votes, it's only half of the people in Taiwan. And so, but I do get the sense that more and more people here now, they just say, oh, they won. And it seems to me that they is the people in Taiwan. And so it seems to them that DPP represents the people of Taiwan instead of just another party in Taiwan.
Considering the mainlanders, their population is only 15 to 20%.
Yeah.
How can the KMT basically be those? And if their votes are approximately 50%, how could they be just those invading mainlanders? I mean,
You mean if they're such a minority?
They're such a minority. How did they get their votes up to 49%?
Oh, well, because not necessarily people who are not called mainlanders are all the supporters of DPP, and so, people who were born in Taiwan or just like even if generations before, like their ancestors were already in Taiwan, they could still be supportive of the relations with China, or they could still be supportive of the policies that the blue camp has, or they could just be really tired of Chen Shui-bian and just wants another change. But it's not necessarily like all the people who vote for the blue camp are the people who went to Taiwan in 1949. I would think that many of the people on the islands were still supporters of the blue camp. Just because you're labeled like Taiwanese doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be a supporter of the green camp.
Do you feel Taiwanese Americans, do you feel that they've been deceived by the DPP, the ones that have not been back to Taiwan?
Well, I don't know. Sometimes they could probably be politically deceived, but also, I don't know what to call that, because they're probably deceived, but if they would just look at it or just, read more on it instead of just taking whatever Chen Shui-bian tells them to believe in. Just read from other media, or take this election, for example, just accept other points of view. But I guess for them, they don't even want to accept other points of view. And so, it can say be deceived, or you can say just his supporters are those people who are very narrow-sighted and just they're very blinded by everything else, and so they don't want to accept anything else other than what he says, and so they're willingly to be deceived. They're willing to be deceived.
But don't you think it's their united hatred towards the KMT that really makes them want
Well,
to?
the problem is if you ask the younger generation, people my age, do they really know any hatred towards the KMT? If it wasn't from their parents, who tell them. And so it's kind of also the KMT people, it's I think it's just a matter of brainwashing, because they personally don't feel much, especially if you born and raised here, if your parents were also here for a long time, other than stories that people tell you and from your grandparents and stuff like that.
I can tell you that people our age have a very, very intense hatred.
Well, I know, but I'm saying it's not from their.
What's happened to their parents as well as their grandparents.
Yeah, so it's not I'm saying it's not a personally affected thing, and so things that happen to their grandparents or to their parents, and it's just on the KMT side, they have this strong thing against the DPP, and it's also from their parents or their grandparents, what they feel about them. And so I think it's just a matter of inheriting what your parents believe in, and it's just a whole big brainwashing thing. But the sad thing is, it's brainwashing, but it's also politicized, and it's also now because of the elections that go on in Taiwan, presidential elections every 4 years, they keep on reminding you of this, and they reuse it just so that they can provoke both sides and in order to get their own votes. So I think it's also a sentiment that's being manipulated for election purposes, for campaigns.
Do you feel that 228 is something that's being perhaps overly emphasized in order to rile up the green camp?
Well, I think the 228 has definitely been overly emphasized, but also been viewed on the island of Taiwan from a very skewed perspective, and because it's just been entirely viewed from the green side's point of view. Whereas I'm not saying whose fault it is, because really I think in these situations there are no faults and there's no right or wrong, but it's just both sides, if you look into the past, the historical facts, both sides had people who were killed, and whether who started it, we don't know. The green side said, the soldiers started it, and that's why there were mobs in the streets. And then the blue side said that, the mobs attacked us first, and so the soldiers, in self-defense, we had to do something. But that's not the point. The point is both sides had people killed, and the reason why now most people in Taiwan think that it seemed to us that the green side had were the victims, whereas the KMT has just been shown as the ruthless killers, is because the KMTs, for them, they were at the time very few of them had family members in Taiwan because they were brought over and they were soldiers. And so if they were killed, then their family members in mainland China, they wouldn't have been in Taiwan. And so now they wouldn't have people in Taiwan who will remember them. Or the most people they will have, it would just be like family, it would just be friends. And so their stories will not be passed on, whereas the green side stories are passed on to, you know, other generations and their families and friends and everyone. And so that's why now I feel like when you recall the 228 incidents, it seems to be painted a very, like, politically painted, and it's being very swayed in favor of the green side and to rally up support against KMT. It's not even rally up support for anything. It's just to rally up support against KMT and to picture them as, like, you know, people who betrayed us and just our enemy. And so I know that's very hard on also like the mainland, what they call the mainlanders, the Western, because now we have to like be blamed for all that stuff. And there is really no right or wrong for things like that. But it's just every year, annually, if the government has to bring that whole situation back up again. And I mean, I can understand having a memorial and all that, but to make such a big deal out of it, and especially not portraying it justly or in a neutral tone, or just not even looking into the past and bringing back the historical facts, but just purely painting it in their own way, I think that's very much screwing the popular sentiments and manipulating the people again.
How do you feel about, are you aware of the fact that there is a 228 Memorial Park in every single county in Taiwan?
I've heard about it, and I know that President Chen, like every year on February 28th, he would go there and he has this like memorial thing, an event that he does, and he reads out something in memorial of that. Yeah, I know.
When I was there the day after the election, I was there with my group, and we were in the 228 Park in Taipei, and it was this heartfelt moment for the group, and some blue protesters came marching through the park and were making a lot of noise, and they looked at my camera and they said, "Look at how disrespectful they are, and they have no respect. This is the Peace Park, you know, they just have no respect, they're very uncivilized." And how do you feel about that?
I think they call it the Peace Park, but really 228 in Taiwan has not been a symbol or representative of any kind of peace, because I just think that if Chen Shui-bian's intention was for peace and for unity in Taiwan between like all parties and all groups of people, then he wouldn't be constantly bringing up 228 and constantly always, you know, he would bring up 228 but also use that as like a historical lesson, you know, what we should do, but he doesn't. And so I feel like in order for Taiwan to really prosper, you really need unity. And what he's doing is he's just further segregating the two groups. And that's actually what he wants, because by further segregating it, he can guarantee his own election base or his own people. And I just don't know, well, you said that your friend said that, oh, you know, they were doing demonstration protests, but I think it's just because for the blue camp, these memorials don't necessarily mean a peace park at all. And for them, when Chen Shui-bian continuously bring up 228, and during the campaigns, all the labels that have been placed on the blue camp, all the names that we've been, you know, labeled on us, you know, pigs and stuff like that, it's just those aren't really peaceful. It's just all the things that are related to 228 aren't representative of peace and unity. And so for them, they don't see how that park should be a peace park as well.
You think?
And also, they probably do also think that by doing, you know, you said you had a heartfelt moment there, and they probably felt that by having all these commemorations and, you know, memorials, it's also another way of Chen Shui-bian using the popular sentiment. And so they probably just think it's another one of his campaign tricks and not of anything substantial.
So would you say that these quote-unquote peace parks are there to promote hatred among the people?
Well, I don't think it's hatred, but I think by putting it everywhere and the way how he's doing it, it's promoting segregation among the two groups. And it's even clearer if you're on the blue side of the group, because you're the minority and you feel it the most. And so I don't think it's necessarily hatred, but it's just separating the two groups, and it's definitely not helping.
Are you aware of what the plaque says, in particular on the Taipei?
What does it say?
It says, it describes the incident, and then there's a sentence at the end that says, and a few mainlanders were killed. How do you feel about that statement?
Again, I think that goes back to what I think they try to paint it like, of course, they want to say a few mainlanders were killed so that it doesn't sound too weird that, of this whole thing, none of the mainlanders were killed. But I just think the way how they said it is completely slanted and swayed, and I can't see any reason for doing it other than rousing up sentiment for his side, and which is why I think it's to provoke further segregation. I can't see any other purposes for doing it, and it's definitely not for peace or unity.
Okay. Are you aware of the fact that that park in Taipei was put in 2000?
Oh, I think, yeah, I did. I know it was put in.
Okay.
Lately.
So therefore, it was an interesting experience for me because I thought that what the blue protesters were doing was wrong, because I was like, oh, this is such a sacred place, right? And later on, I was told by one of the people who walked to the park on the blue side that, oh, I think you just don't understand the history, that that park used to be just a normal park. And we grew up in that park in Taipei, so to us, it's just a normal park, and then in 2000, it got switched to a 228 Peace Park.
Yeah, because the thing is, it's not like there's a place where the thing happened and they just named that place the Peace Park. It was more like you transform a normal public facility and you just named it the Peace Park. And I think it's actually, it is normal because, I mean, even with my parents, my family, I grew up, and every time I hear 228, I always felt like, oh, I feel like a lot of mainlanders had killed people in Taiwan. I just didn't really know because of what I heard from school and just like from the media. But then I would ask my parents, and then they would tell me, you know what, actually mainlanders also died too. But it's just like, even for someone growing up in my family with that background, I would still, every time I think of 228, I would feel like, oh, maybe, you know what, these are things that happened. But then it was because you've been so just brainwashed by the media and also by Chen Shui-bian and the whole country, the government itself. And now with all those parks coming up, it's just even harder not to be influenced by it.
Okay. If this documentary were to be viewed in if this documentary were to be viewed in Taiwan, about Taiwanese Americans, how they view Taiwan, if it were to be viewed, how do you think it would be received, assuming both perspectives from the blue and green side were both shared?
I think it'll be a very interesting experience because it's made by someone who, is from the States, grew up here. But I don't know. First of all, I don't know how where it's going to be shown, who's going to be seeing it. But I hope that, and I mean, it's not like anything I say here is anything new, but it'll maybe, give them another twist, or just remind them that there's still this kind of thinking that still exists, and depending on who sees it, they may love it or they may hate it. And I just hope that, they can still treat it as, this is a documentary, and so we're not staging anything, we didn't make anything up. This is all what the interview is really believe in, and just, take it as another perspective and live with it.